You know what's fascinating? We've spent decades watching two generations exist side by side in the workplace, in families, at Thanksgiving dinners, and somehow we've completely missed what's actually happening between them. Gen X and Millennials. One generation that learned to survive by becoming invisible, and another that was told visibility was the entire point, and the psychological clash between them. It explains almost everything you see playing out in offices, in family dynamics, and in how we argue about literally everything online. I'm talking about people born between 1965 and 1980 versus people born between 1981 and 1996. And before you think this is just another generational stereotype fest, stay with me, because the actual psychology here gets uncomfortable in ways that make you rethink every interaction you've had with either group. Here's what nobody tells you. These two generations were raised with completely opposite instruction manuals for the same world. Gen X came home to empty houses and learned that nobody's coming to save you. Millennials came home to scheduled activities and learned that someone's always watching, always evaluating, always keeping score. One generation's survival mechanism is the other generation's anxiety trigger. And we've just been letting them collide without any translation guide. Let's start with Gen X, because they're easier to miss. By 1984, roughly 7 million children between ages 5 and 13 were latchkey kids, according to the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry. That's an entire generation that learned self-reliance wasn't a virtue, it was a requirement. You came home, made your own snack, did your homework alone, and figured out your own problems because there was literally nobody there to ask. This created what psychologists call a high contingency environment, where actions had immediate, real consequences with no buffer. But here's the part that messes with you. That same generation watched their parents' marriages fall apart at record rates. They saw corporate loyalty rewarded with pink slips during the massive restructuring of the 80s and 90s. The social contract they observed was simple. Promises mean nothing. Prepare for disappointment, and whatever you do, will depend on anyone. Psychologists call this defensive pessimism. Gen X just calls it pattern recognition. Now flip the script entirely. Millennials were the guinea pigs for the self-esteem movement. Helicopter parents, participation trophies. You're special just for existing. Dr. Twenge's research in Generation Me found that millennials score higher on narcissism scales than previous generations. But here's the twist that'll break your brain. They also score higher on anxiety and depression. You've got people who simultaneously believe they're exceptional and feel completely worthless. High expectations meeting brutal reality in real time. Millennials were told that effort equals outcome. Study hard, go to college, work your way up. Except when they showed up ready to follow that path, college cost 10 times more, entry-level jobs required 5 years of experience, and here's your $80. Zero in debt, and a gig economy where you're an independent contractor with no benefits. The psychological term for when reality fundamentally violates your core beliefs. Schema disruption. And it happened to an entire generation simultaneously. Here's where it gets really interesting. Put these two generations in the same workplace and watch what happens. Gen X sees millennials asking questions about everything and thinks, why can't they just figure it out? Because Gen X figured it out alone at age 8. Millennials see Gen X not asking for help and think, why are they so closed off? Because millennials were raised in an environment where asking for feedback was literally part of the curriculum. Gen X developed competence as armor. They can't control whether they'll get laid off, but they can control being the most valuable person in the room when layoffs happen. They respect skill, not titles. If you've earned your position through actual competence, they'll follow you anywhere. If you're just someone with a fancy title who doesn't know what they're doing, they have zero patience. They watched incompetent authority figures make terrible decisions, from Watergate to Iran-Contra to the AIDS crisis. Authority has to be earned. Millennials, meanwhile, were taught to question everything, but through formal channels. They want to understand the why behind decisions because their education system literally trained them to think that way. They're the most educated generation in history and the most diverse. They grew up with the internet showing them multiple versions of truth depending on who's telling the story. Critical thinking meeting systems that were never designed to be. QUESTIONED looks like entitlement to people who are taught to just deal with it. And social media. Gen X learned early that privacy equals safety. When you messed up as a kid, maybe a handful of people knew. No phones, no viral videos, just awkward memories that stayed buried. The idea of broadcasting your life for strangers doesn't feel exciting to them. It feels dangerous. They turned irony into a shield. Crack a joke, keep things at arm's length, laugh it off before it stings. Millennials got social media during their formative years, not as kids like Gen Z, but as teenagers and young adults when their identities were still forming. Facebook launched in 2004, Instagram in 2010. They learned to be adults while simultaneously learning to perform their lives for an audience. Dr. Tim Kasser's research shows that when people base their self-worth on external validation, which is literally what social media trains you to do, their mental health tanks. You're running a 24/7 campaign for your own existence, and the polls never close. But here's what's psychologically fascinating. Both generations are responding completely rationally to the environments that shaped them. Gen X's self-reliance isn't coldness, it's adaptation. Research in the Journal of Adult Development shows Gen Xers report lower levels of seeking social support during stressful periods. Not because they don't have people they could ask, but because asking feels like admitting defeat. That's what happens when you learn at 8 years old that you're on your own. Millennials' need for feedback and validation isn't weakness, it's also adaptation. They were raised in systems that provided constant feedback loops. Gold stars, progress reports, standardized testing that started in elementary school. Remove those feedback mechanisms in adulthood, and their brains literally don't know how to calibrate success. It's like taking away the instrument panel mid-flight and telling the pilot to just wing it. The economic piece makes this even more brutal. Gen X faced the dot-com crash and the 2008 crisis when they should have been building wealth. They learned to have multiple income streams because nothing lasts. Millennials graduated into the 2008 recession, got hit again by COVID, and are now navigating housing costs that have outpaced wage growth by absurd margins while carrying student debt levels that would have been unthinkable before. Both generations got economically traumatized, just at different life stages. And now they're supposed to work together, live together, figure out the world together, while speaking completely different psychological languages. Gen X thinks millennials are too sensitive. Millennials think Gen X is emotionally unavailable. Both are right. Both are wrong. They're just operating from entirely different instruction manuals that nobody bothered to compare. The truth behind their behavior isn't that one generation is better or worse. It's that we're watching two completely different survival strategies collide in real time. Gen X learned to survive by becoming invisible, self-reliant, and expecting nothing. Millennials learned to survive by being visible, seeking validation, and questioning everything. Neither approach is wrong. They read just responses to radically different childhoods, preparing them for a world that keeps changing the rules anyway. If this hit home for you, please subscribe.